What is up, YouTube? We're carrying on from our last episode talking about resampling synths and leads. And today we're going to be looking at how to resample and essentially kind of resynthesize a sample using Cubase's sampler track. So let's dive in and have a look. So this is the loop that we've got so far. And what I want to do is I want to use just a single kind of like pluck from that sound to create a sort of like atmospheric hit sort of lead synth sound. And I'm going to show you guys what I'm talking about. So again, like I explained in the previous tutorial, let's duplicate this track and we can just mute this first one. So let's actually just use this first hit because I know for sure that that's, you know, the right key of the track that we're working in. So let's just drag it so that we've got only that sample playing. Something like that, and then we can right click and say bounce selection. So now we can actually just right click again and say create sampler track. And what it's going to do is it's going to open up a sampler track, obviously, and it's going to automatically load up that sample into the track. So what we can do now is we can actually just mute that, because if we go over to our MIDI controller, it should be playing that exact sound. Let's head back to the sampler track, and here what we can do is we can enable audio warp. So this allows us to actually stretch the audio file to do all sorts of weird things. But what we want to also do is maybe add some distortion. And you'll hear kind of like the sort of effect of that kind of warp gets accentuated quite a bit more with the distortion. So let's just do that straight off the bat. So that's pretty cool. It kind of takes that kind of sound and turns it either into like a pluck sound or more of like a pad type of sound. Here, what we might want to do is just make sure that we set this to the key of the actual sample. This is the root note. So if we're playing, for example, our track in G sharp and we want to use the MIDIs that exist already, then we're going to just want to drag that over so that now G sharp on the keyboard is essentially triggering a G sharp note in the sampler, if that makes sense. So we've quickly taken that kind of like texture or that tone that we created in Thorn and created a sort of much simpler way of quickly warping how we want that kind of sound to replay. And I find this particularly effective because when you're dabbling with the plugins themselves, you can often get kind of like drawn into all the complicated parameters and stuff. And sometimes the most important things are just kind of like the sort of envelope of the sound and the sort of placement of where that sound is in the overall arrangement of the track, as opposed to like what percentage is the sync rate at and all this, you know, all that kind of really in-depth stuff that tends to happen when you have a plugin loaded. So there's various modes you can use here. I tend to stick with music. That just sounds a lot more natural, specifically when using these kind of like plucky sounds. And so here, generally speaking, obviously depends on the source sound that you use, but often I tend to move the start point over a little bit because there's a little bit of a kind of ramp up in the envelope of the original sound. And using the start point tends to fix that up a little bit. So there's all sorts of different like filters and filter shapes and types and stuff like that. But because the distortion is after the filter, I don't like to get too nitty-gritty with that section too much. I'll generally add a filter onto the actual effects of the channel. So let's head on over to the effects. So let's add a delay and a reverb, because we want to kind of create this sort of huge plucky kind of hit sound, like at the beginning of the bar, to kind of introduce that tone or that texture of the sound that we're going to bring in later as our sort of main lead. And this is cool to use as a kind of like, intro sound, or, as a sort of main like background effect in the track, because then when that main lead comes back in again, your ear is already kind of like expecting that tone that's being played, if that kind of makes any sense. So here I like to bounce out a couple of different variations and sort of render them back into audio, with a couple of like different like reverb settings, a couple of different kind of MIDIs and stuff like that. And then I can use those as like building blocks to create a kind of like atmosphere while those sort of main leads and stuff aren't being played. So let's render this one out and we can create another variation of that. So it's pretty cool to kind of like use some glide effects with these type of sounds. So what you might want to do is just turn on this monophonic mode over here, and I believe this one shot mode as well. And then also if you've got a MIDI controller, it's very cool to automate this sort of speed setting. And you get like almost like a sort of like gated effect. So we can actually just take, like, for example, another MIDI. I just want to set all of these to the same note. And then we can automate that speed. So check this out. A big thanks to IDM Mag, proud supporters of the dance music scene and my channel. Awesome, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you use similar techniques, I know you can do similar things with Ableton Sampler, so if you're doing similar things, let me know in the comments as well. As always, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. See you guys next time.